members of the team. Mary Ann, who is on our brand new camera, which is really great. We're so excited. This is going to be something owned by the church and used to videotape our sessions. And then they will be available on the YouTube channel, so if you are unable to make them at any time, you're certainly welcome to go to the YouTube channel for the church. And they will be there. It may take a week or two to get them there, but they will be good. Also, John Jentz, one of our members who helped bring these fine people here, Jane Brad, and who else? Eric Seymour. That's everybody that's here. Pete Todd, who is the person who has worked with us very closely to put this together. So thank you to all being here. This morning we have two people who are well known in this community and are making great contributions. Vicki Scaman, most of you know, is a recently re-elected president of Oak Park, Village of Oak Park. And prior to that, she served as a clerk for our village, and before that, she worked for the township. She also with us today, Rob Guenthner, who is the Oak Park River Forest Chamber of Commerce president. And Rob is the owner of the Kettle Strings Restaurant Group and served on the board of chamber prior to becoming president a couple years ago. So we're going to let them open it with some information, and then we're going to open it to you all for questions, comments, anything you want to know. These are two people that are obviously very knowledgeable about our community.
Thank you. Now for the recording, do I need to have this at any particular distance, or this is good?
Close to
I would adjust it. You put them where you're comfortable and I'll adjust it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, so thank you for having me. I've been with you before. We talked about our homelessness the last time I was here, which honestly is probably going to be a big topic again today, as it is still an ongoing concern here in our village and something that is part of almost daily conversations inside Village Hall with partners like Housing Forward, which I also saw you have upstairs, and you have coming forward in a future discussion here, our ECHO team, which is engaging community for healthy outcomes, and one of our responses to our homeless challenges in serving some of our just connecting people with resources generally. But I'll start off by sharing some of the previously approved village board goals that have been ongoing. And these are board goals that started with my first term. Community affordability, community health and safety, racial equity, vibrant, diverse, connected neighborhoods, sustainability and resiliency, and economic vitality. So after every election, including the midterms, one of the first things that we do is sit down with our new colleagues or re-elected colleagues and jointly decide on those goals and set some priorities. And then that quickly leads us straight into a budget season, which ultimately gives the village manager the directive that he needs. This year we also, so we've done that just recently with this newly elected board, and so we will be fine-tuning those goals, which greatly overlap with the ones that you've just heard, with a little bit more definition. And we have also engaged with a consultant for that accountability. Now that's not set that we're going to actually work with that consultant, but it's providing kind of an onboarding for elected officials. Something that, many of you might remember the VMA, the Village Manager Association, which could act as a mentor and to elected officials and provide some history and also just help people in the community be aware of these elected roles for some level of recruitment, right? So what we want to be doing is operating in a transparent enough way that we are trying to fill the gap that the loss of the VMA left in that mentoring, in that onboarding, in that recruitment, so that more people in our community understand how our government works and can engage in a healthy way. And so we're going to be I said, it's not completely confirmed, and every elected official, including myself, is just one vote. So the name of the game is always counting to 4 to get full, support to move something forward. Is having some accountability for those board goals and a timeline that can reduce frustration and increase that directive and provide more clarity to the village manager. So our ongoing concerns right now are, as they've said, addressing our community, small business needs, and the needs of our most vulnerable residents in dealing with homelessness, but also in, like I said, connecting all of our residents with the resources they need to live and thrive. We obviously, or maybe I shouldn't say obviously, but I'll state it for myself, have great concerns over engaging the federal government. Engaging the federal government in a way that still is aligned with our value system, but also then those funding opportunities that have been something we've learned to rely on and with our CDBG funds that may otherwise be at risk. Currently, we're doing well with our federal funding, but there's always a shift that we need to prepare for and have contingency plans for. Having that overall affordability, understanding it's not just our taxes that can make it challenging for residents to remain in Oak Park, or for us to remain a socially, racially diverse and socioeconomically diverse community. Ongoing concerns or hot topics continue to be, right now, a hot one is the Moore Cement Factory and what is potentially viable for that space. So, and bike lanes, I'm sure you've read some bit about that, right? What's to happen with Village Hall, our commitment to a new police station, future discussions around zoning and missing middle being that opportunity for 3 flats, 6 flats, or how we can reuse buildings that are here in Oak Park for additional housing that's diverse and contributes to those affordability goals. Our Citizen Police Oversight Commission, and continuing to work through what was a report that came from my first term, a very done report on modernizing our police response and support and oversight. And then of course sustainability. So I'll backtrack a tiny bit, but it's nice to have a group that if you have questions, we can have an ongoing dialogue after our introductions, okay? So please do ask any additional questions as well. So I think it's important to note that the Moore Cement land right now is still privately owned. It's in foreclosure, but under a non-second term, there was an opportunity to purchase it if the board was not so inclined to continue to purchase property. There had been kind of an increase in that years prior and a desire politically with those elected officials at that time to act less like realtors. But the appropriate time in my mind, for government to step in is when you otherwise would have blighted land. So I might have, if I had the opportunity at that time, agreed with the non to purchase the land. Now we are waiting for the first opportunity to be able to do so that we can see something that would most benefit our community, either diversifying our tax base or increasing the services that are here in our village. But the developer had purchased it from the Moore family at a rather high amount, at $7 million, which is over its value at this time. It's valued more around $4 million. So everything that they've brought forward in these last 5 or 7 to 6 years to potentially develop has not financially been feasible. So So now what we see before us is kind of their last ditch effort to see something pass before they then have to foreclose on the land. And then that is our first opportunity, once that passes, for the village to potentially step in and work with the community for something that would be of mutual benefit and aligned with our strategic plan. Bike lanes. So we are investing in a network throughout our entire village of where you can get from point A to point B just about anywhere in our community using a bike safely. I'm an avid biker. When I first filled out a survey for a resident group bike walk Oak Park, I said, yeah, I feel pretty comfortable biking in Oak Park. But then as we became denser and denser, I realized, yeah, I was white knuckling it too, even when I'm somebody who can bike along Lakeshore Drive without, feeling challenged. So, and we do want to see our children and families be safe riding around our community. But that takes significant investment, and that's matched with something called Vision Zero. Not a great name. Anytime you put zero in the name of something, it makes you think in a deficit manner, right? But it's really about working towards zero accidents is what that's about. So increasing those vision lines, designing your streets in a way that it naturally slows traffic down. And having that more holistic view. When I first came into office, we had a practice of addressing traffic safety by complaint, and enforcing residents to go through a petition process that could be, could increase division. And now what we're looking is to give our staff the tools that they need to be proactive in addressing those traffic needs. It's still going to require, until we really get going, residents to still bring forward their concerns and for us to study them and respond. But this means that less of that should have to come to the village board and more of it could be more immediately responsive from staff to resident. We are going to have, did I skip over? Okay. Village Hall. So our priority is a new police station. As I've said the last time I think I was here, the price tag was never $150 million, at least if the board had approved. The board never approved that dollar amount. It might have been suggested by a consultant at one point or another, but we said, sorry, we're not going to be willing to pay that dollar amount. So the delay is no conspiracy theory. The delay is making sure that we identify a location and a plan that is the most affordable for our community. It is our responsibility as elected officials to make sure that we are eventually bringing forward something that is viable, that we can, and also meets our needs. So I hope that we'll see that coming forward very soon. But that it has been staff diligently working to reach those expectations of the board. And then for Village Hall, we had discussions with our previous board at prioritizing where our greatest needs were, with safety and disability access and healthy workspace for our employees being the top 3 priorities. Currently, not that I wish to advertise this too much, but the council chambers in my mind is beautiful, but until we had some of our first more challenging moments in a more diverse political environment, even though our board has operated in a way that I believe has minimized that as much as we can, realizing that we enter council chambers through a tube, and that if something were to happen, it would be very difficult to exit safely, and then down a very steep set of stairs. And the building is quite rude to any level of disability access. And in this kind of more private setting here with the recording, that's still fine. Bill Dring, the architect who was on site every day, a longtime Oak Parker, some of you might know, and my extended family have been having Christmases together for the last 22 years. I do share the love, but I can't ignore that we have a responsibility to provide for the people who work for us and be accessible to our residents. And so those challenges do need to be serving as our village clerk for 4 years only made that the challenges extremely clear to me. And I've also witnessed our community invest in Band-Aid solutions that then don't last. And we're going to end up undoing some of that ourselves from just the previous administration. Rather than building a new police station, they invested in attempting to increase morale by making the parking lot prettier. Well, I'm about to tear up that parking lot. So that was a Band-Aid that was a lot of wasted money. When we really just needed to address the needs of our employees. We need a new police station. So that is the priority. We're going to have a lot of engagement around the zoning and missing middle. So I is not a duper. I'm a dear old Oak Parker. I moved here in Oak Park in 1987, but a long-time resident of our village. Do believe that our architecture, our beautiful community, our beautiful parks are assets that we do need to protect. At the same time, I want to modernize how it is that we work with families on addressing, that they have new modern needs with their homes. So how do we do both? And how do we continue to diversify those housing availability so that people of all socioeconomic backgrounds can live here in Oak Park? And so we're going to do a lot of engagement and work with a consultant for our missing middle discussions and for our zoning discussions, making sure that we're also identifying clearly what our goals are. So, and maybe having some test pilot programs and creating a task force, because the changes that we need to make, we want to make sure that we understand any unintended consequences. For instance, you hear some of the getting rid of single-family zoning. I live in a smaller bungalow in Oak Park. Yes, I've tried to convince my significant other to blow up the roof and add another floor myself, but I would effectively be taking a affordable housing single-family home off the market, rather than, if I could afford to do so, just purchasing something that does fit my needs. But then how do I prevent a developer from going, oh boy, this is some money to make, because it is. And so how can we protect some of that naturally affordable occurring housing at the same time? So making sure we have defined what our goals are and leading that process in a way that is, intentional. Intentional with understanding what any unintended consequences might be. And so we are, so you heard that I used to work at the township, right? So I'm kind of the school teacher route to politics. Well, I don't know. I used to just say elected official, not necessarily politics, but in this day and age right now, it does feel a little bit more political than our service to our community as intended. But I worked in 2014 to bring youth adjudication to our community. We started that work in 2010, and that was about addressing some underage drinking and cannabis challenges that we had. Now, vaping is a bigger challenge. But what we worked with our police department to really identify what it was that was a barrier to helping young people then access the resources that they need. And one of the challenges was police didn't want to arrest a young person for being at a party at the wrong place or the wrong time and then have something on their record. So what we did is we created a local ticket, a local adjudication, so that police could, but then it was only $30, so you de-incentivized calling an attorney. Because then those who could afford to call the attorney, it just went away, and those who couldn't were the ones who ended up at Cook County. And that was not our goal, right? But what we didn't want is we didn't want the police to just turn a blind eye, because for some of our young people, there was a need for an assessment and a need to connect with resources. And so by having youth adjudication in-house, we were able to then do that. So I advocated for that in both Oak Park and River Forest. Now that it's over 10 years later, that all needs to be looked at again with partnership of the township and some more restorative justice practices, because currently right now, community services or therapy is what's really leaned in on, and that's not going to help everybody. So the Citizen Police Oversight Commission, I've probably gone past our 10 minutes, huh? And I thought I was going to be quick. is currently looking at what is a really good model already of over 50 years of having citizen oversight over citizen complaints of our police department. But right now, again, just like that other program, you need to, take a look at things. You can't just assume that they're still meeting modern needs. So we did a very done report that identified the resources for the police that they need as far as data collection and additional potential training or task forces, and then increasing that trust and oversight with our police to our residents. And so now we've more recently finished work with a consultant on reviewing our Citizen Police Oversight Commission, where we have training for those individuals who serve on that commission. And it's all designed to continue to build that trust, but still have the level of accountability that we need. Sustainability is one of my favorite goals of our village. I'm the founding village president of something called C4. I hope you'll invite that group back at some point. I don't micromanage it at this point, but I am one of the founding mayors of it, or village presidents. When I first got into office in 2021, I saw the great passion around addressing our climate change, and that we were doing it in a bit of a bubble. And that we could literally fix every house here in Oak Park and insulate it, and we would not make the impact needed on our environment that it would be if you could do that with our surrounding communities. So I immediately recruited Mayor Katrina Thompson from Broadview and Kathy Aducey from River Forest. Love that it was 3 women leaders, and created something called C4, Cross Community Climate Collaborative. So we now have 14 communities working to address climate change together in partnership with Gary Cunene at 7 Generations Ahead and Darnell Johnson at Urban Efficiencies Group, which makes it a P3, a way that governments can be more financially utilizing the resources available to us is with those public-private partnerships. So one thing that Village of Oak Park has great privilege in being a home rule community. Many of our smaller communities to the west of us are not home rule, so they can't create a sustainability fund. They can't create an affordable housing fund. They have to stick with the parameters that the state gives them if they're not a home rule community. Well, so we can. And that immediately creates economic barriers for those communities. And then those are the same communities that then have to fight for dollars at Cook County to have access to what we have access to almost directly in funding sources. And so Gary Cunene acts as a helps write grants for those communities that don't otherwise have that technical assistance immediately available. And Urban Efficiencies Group creates the roadmap for each of the 14 communities towards their success, depending on where they're starting from on sustainability. And so we have secured more than $3 million in grants to this day, including additional funds coming this year with this 20 state budget to the Village of Oak Park to continue that work, including workforce development, working with our youth, and just continuing to identify where grants would have the greatest impact overall. So that was a lot. But then I'm looking forward to the questions. I'm going to turn it over to Rob, and I'm sure there's something I forgot, and I'm sure you'll remind me.
Thank you, President Scaman. That was great. Thanks for sharing all of that with us. I'm going to take a slightly different approach. As Marcia mentioned, I'm the president of the Oak Park River Forest Chamber of Commerce currently. So I'm going to talk about the issues facing Oak Park from an economic vitality business perspective. How many of you think it's important that you be able to go out for entertainment, go out to dinner, go shopping in your community? Anyone think that's not important? One person thinks that's not important. Right, fair enough. So I would say, I think given that, well, let's assume that we're representative of the whole community, and most people, the vast majority of people think that's important. It's also important for tax-based purposes. Who thinks your property taxes should go up? Yeah, no one, right? Guess what? One way to keep your property taxes up is for the village to have other sources of income, including sales tax, business taxes, other taxes. So having a thriving business environment really is important to any community. There are a number of issues that I think are affecting our ability, and I want to be clear, I think we have a very thriving business community in our park today. There are a few things that I think we have to address over the next few years to maintain that, to grow that. I'd love to see, I think it is thriving today, I'd love to see a wider variety of businesses in Oak Park. Who thinks we have enough restaurants in Oak Park? And I own some of them, and I think we have plenty. I'd like to see, who thinks we have enough shopping places in Oak Park? Yeah, not really, right? And that's an area where I think we could do better as a community, right? Particularly, I mean, think food shopping, I think we're good, but for home goods, apparel, things like that, I think we could do better. So I personally would like to see a diverse offering within the community. And in order to do that, there's a few things that we just have to acknowledge. And these are not unique to Oak Park. They're not really even unique to Illinois. But what are the main challenges that we have to address? Every couple of years, the Chamber puts out a survey. And it was interesting. The last one we did was in 2023. And when I looked at that in preparing for today, a lot of those same things are, here we are 2025. They're still, if we did one today, a lot of those would be the same. One that's probably wouldn't come up is COVID, and quite as strongly, right? Still in 2030, people are still very concerned about COVID. That's fortunately less of a concern today. But general health and well-being is certainly still a big concern. But the things that we see today that are really the challenges that we have to address as a business community, and I will say, I should say this outside, the Chamber has been very fortunate that the Village of Oak Park and President Scaman and the entire administration have been very supportive of our business community. We have a great working relationship. Does that mean everything is perfect? Of course not. But some of the things that people complain about, I hear and I say, that's just not right. People will say to me, well, one of the biggest problems we have in Oak Park is there's too much regulation, it's too hard to get a business license, it's all too confusing. And I'll say, well, did you go talk to anybody at Village Hall? Well, no. Well, you know what? If you did, they would explain how to do it for you, right? When I started my first restaurant in Oak Park, Cameron Davis was in charge of economic vitality at the time. Cameron's since retired, but I had no idea what I was doing. And I talked to some people and they were going, it's so complicated, you'll never get this done, it's gonna take you forever. I called, or emailed Cam Davis and I said, hi, I'm a local resident, I'm thinking about starting this business. Wonder if I could pick your brain. I think he sat with me for about 2 hours, walked me through everything I needed to do, and was a great resource. And he was through his entire tenure. And now the folks who are leading economic vitality today are, I think, just as approachable and just as. So there's a great partnership there. That doesn't mean we don't have a lot of regulation that can be challenging. That doesn't mean that our fire code could be a little more understandable. But there are people there that are willing to help you. So when we look at the challenges today, really it's costs. It's inflation, it's the cost of supplies, right? So for those of you that don't know Kettle Springs Restaurant, but we have 4 restaurants in the area. The original one is Kettle Springs Tavern down on South Oak Park Avenue. It's a bar and grill neighborhood. It's literally on the corner of Oak Park and Van Buren, so it's like the corner tavern, right? And we serve hamburgers and chicken sandwiches and salads and things. Our costs keep going up. Every month our costs are going up. And those are the costs of supplies. Those are the cost of employees. That's the cost of real estate. Every cost in our operations go up every month. We live in this community. Our children are in this community. Almost everybody in here looks familiar to me if I don't know your name. I have to be a good steward of the community as well, right? And so as our costs go up, we can't just say, oh, well, our costs went up 5%, so we're going to raise the price of hamburgers 5%. If I did that, I'd be charging you guys like $40 for a hamburger. Like, none of you would pay that, and I would feel horrible doing that, right? So what you're seeing in the business community is the consumer's willingness to pay is not keeping up with the supply cost increases. And that's fine, right? Eventually that will rectify itself. And this is much bigger than Oak Park. Eventually economic theory says that will rectify itself because demand will fall as prices go up, and that will fix itself. But right now, it's a very big issue that we're facing throughout Oak Park and throughout Illinois as well. Economic and governmental uncertainty, I think, is another big issue that we're all grappling with. And what I really mean there is everything that's going on in the world, right? It's making people nervous. It's making people less inclined to go out and spend, right? So it's making people feel a little tighter with their wallets. I know my family feels it. I think everybody does. You're not as inclined to go on the big vacation or invest in things that you might have otherwise for entertainment purposes, because you're not sure where the economy's headed. And then you layer onto that the sort of cultural things going on in our country right now, and that makes people very nervous. When people are nervous, they tend to stay home and spend less. Taxes, I won't belabor the point, but obviously, people sometimes think, well, property taxes don't affect businesses, particularly if you lease your space. You don't pay the property tax. Well, guess what? If the property tax goes up and you lease space, somehow the landlord is going to pass that on to you. So when property taxes go up, obviously that increases. And then one that I think goes, and I said I was going to focus on the business community, but one that I think I'd like to mention that it goes beyond the business community, in my opinion, is the notion of civility. One of the reasons I moved to Oak Park, I am also not a dear old Oak Parker, but I've moved here for 20-ish years now. One of the reasons I moved to Oak Park was it was just such a lovely community, like not physically lovely, but just the people were so lovely. I think in the world, sort of as a nation, we have lost some of that. I think in Oak Park, honestly, I will say, I think we've lost some of that community nature. To give you a real world example, there is a local restaurant in town, you may have heard this story, that there was an effort to boycott that because people didn't believe in their politics. That's fine, right? If you don't believe in my politics, you have a hard time figuring out what they are probably, but if you could figure it out, you don't agree, don't come to my restaurant. That's fine, I get that. But I don't think it's civil to try to get everyone else in town to say, you shouldn't go there because I don't agree with that person's politics. It got so bad in this particular case, there were calls. I actually saw it myself on social media, which I should stay off of. That's probably the biggest problem, social media, but put that aside. Where somebody actually put up a post and said, let's all boycott until we can run these people out of our community. And it horrified me to see that, right? No matter what you think of somebody's politics, if they're in your community and they're trying to run a business, we have to, again, you personally can say, I choose not to support that person, but to try to say we should run them out of our community to me seems a little oppressive. I'll get off my soapbox. And then the last one I'll just mention is, and this is an issue in Oak Park, but it's also an issue statewide right now, is labor and workforce. It remains hard. Being in the restaurant industry, probably the biggest challenge we had coming out of COVID was a lack of people who wanted to work in that environment. Part of that was the fear of COVID and other illnesses. Part of it was people got accustomed to working at home. No joke, I had a person interview for a job in one of our restaurants shortly after we got out of the pandemic. They said, well, is there a work from home policy? How's that work? And it was like, you're interviewing for a job as a server. You understand that? Yeah. I'm like, well, no, there's not a work from home policy. I haven't figured that one out yet. Maybe we can get those robots and they can correct them from home. I'm not sure. But anyway, I digress. But the labor and workforce shortage, particularly for lower skill, lower wage jobs, it's really tough, and it's remained tough. And what we've seen, again, due to the inflation and the rising costs, is people understandably are saying, like, I have to make X number of hours because that's what it takes to live. And totally understand that, but it is cyclical, right? If you say, well, okay, we're going to pay everybody that works in a restaurant $25 an hour, then going back to my $40 hamburger, like that's what causes that, and it does become cyclical. And so, trying to figure out ways that we can pay people appropriately, keep expectations appropriate, and yet pay people a living wage, because that certainly is important. It is another large issue that we're facing. So I will stop there, and we'll turn it over to you guys and see what questions you have for President Scaman or for me.
Okay, we have about 20 minutes. Matki?
Can I use a microphone just because I
Sure.
have a restaurant there?
Yep, can I bring you this one? That work, Jen?
Thanks. Hi, Matsuki Reed, resident of Oak Park for the last 15 years. I'm going to note that I am a federal employee for the last 10 years through the end of September. I am asking this question in my capacity as a private citizen, not as my official capacity for what I'm doing for them. So I actually have two questions in there. I want to thank President Scaman for talking so much about the sort of accessibility needs that are needed, especially in the Village Hall and like other places like that. I was curious to see what emphasis and what thought is being done right now around digital accessibility, especially for the ways that the village is reaching out to people, knowing that you're also going to be reaching out to people who have various disabilities or even that are aging. And so as a result of that, there's things with eyesight and like needing to see things in larger print and all sorts of other stuff that are in there, just so that around the whole complete community. Then my second, that's the first question, visual accessibility. My second question was more tied to one of the first things you said about policies in order to enforce new things around for residents to bring forward in order to change policies. I say this because I live very close to Irving School, that's in the southeast corner of Oak Park. I had my kids, went there, and I've like gone through all this. There's been many issues there because it's on a state road around speeding, around the fact that there are no signs there at the crosswalks. There's one crosswalk that has nothing, where there's been numerous accidents. There's usually an accident like at least once every 1 or 2 months there. It's curious to see like what the procedures and changes you are having now around things like even putting up a sign saying during school days, change your speed limit down to 20 and stuff like that. And like what residents would need to do in order to help work with the village in order to push that forward.
Okay, yep.
Hold on. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for both of those questions. So the current process is to to submit a petition for any place that you'd like to see some mitigation to lower speed and get some buy-in from at least 50% of the people on your block, and then that gets submitted through staff to the Transportation Commission, which is what I was talking about, is kind of putting the onus, the burden on you as the resident, and why it is one of the reasons why we're looking at changing that and having, so if the staff review agrees with you and your neighbors, and then they can, and the money is there in the budget to do the work immediately, then they'll do the work immediately. If there is a disconnect between the residents and our engineering staff, so they'll do a speed study, you know, to see exactly what times of day the challenges might be, how big of a challenge it is, and then recommend whether it's you know, speed bump, stop sign, there's pinch points. The concept between all the pinch points that you see on the corners is that is supposed to slow down the driver. They see that they have less room to get through an area. They naturally just slow down. I actually really like those flashing signs with the speed sign because they just make me hit the brake thinking that it's you know, going to calculate my speed.
Does it change? It's a state road. It's Ridgeland Avenue, so
Yeah.
the state has like jurisdiction over it.
Correct, and we're fighting to get more jurisdiction over some of those streets. The challenge is that means that some of the maintenance falls on us over time, but we are putting around the schools. we have passed a zero zoning or net zero for the zero accident goal already. So there is a plan that now what we're going to see in this budget season is staff coming forward to have that money in the budget so that they can be more responsive. And they put a plan out as to some of those areas off of, particularly around schools and say around Madison Street, where you see people wanting to dodge around what was called the road diet initially, or corners like at Oak Park in Madison, if you want to jog in and cut around the light. You're going to see automatically some changes. Some of that isn't going to happen though until the street needs to get redone. So what you might see is those yellow poles that stick out of the ground, they're like temporary, happen a little bit more often, but then the next time that street needs to be redone, then they'll put those more permanent tools out there to slow down traffic. What we've also done is work to increase what that toolbox looks like. So historically, we haven't wanted to put speed bumps in the middle of the community or medians and islands. Now, because historically it was about not wanting to, all those things were only used around the edges of our community, okay? Now what we want to do is expand that toolbox for more creative, new ways of addressing speed mitigation and throughout the whole community. So it's about assessing our whole community neighborhood by neighborhood instead of block by block and having a more holistic plan. So I hope that even within a year from now, you'll start to see some challenges. But around the schools and around the parks are a priority. And then the first one about access to information. So our communication is probably one of the biggest conversations related to the board goals that we've got. We're looking to consistently have and actually put into policy, which would be the first time we've taken this approach. It's part of that accountability to our board goals, to our votes manager, having what outreach to our community looks like a requirement that you identified the relevant stakeholders. You know, so anytime we're making changes to taxes that would affect our small business community, we would be requiring staff to go to the chamber and work with them, requiring them to go to our Realtors Association and make sure we get their feedback before it comes to the village board so that we have more information to make our decisions. And so what we're doing is lifting up our neighborhood services division. For those of you who remember like the Sherlyn Reed Community Relations Commission days where we were having grassroots outreach to each neighborhood and proactively having those relationships, that's the goal. So you as a neighbor know who to call. Expanding our website so that you can identify who is it that you should be talking to, whatever your problem, your concern or question is, instead of being funneled through a call center and feeling like you're going through a loop. But you know, some of that's going to require going back to paper. Some of that's going to be that grassroots conversations. Some of that realizing that not everybody, even as much as we want to think they do, is utilizing this or a computer for access to information. And language access is also and more top of mind over the last couple of years than it had previously been. You know, when I was village clerk, we did have a contract where you could come in and listen to a board meeting with headphones on, but they were really very rarely used, and people didn't even know that it existed. Now we want to be just, you know, again, not making people ask for what they need to have access to their government and have these systems set up so that it just feels more inviting. And one of my goals as village president is that more people feel a sense of ownership over our community and sense of belonging over our community than when I first started in office. I ran for village clerk in 2017 primarily because as a single mom, I had needed some various resources. And by the time I figured out where to go and who to connect with, I typically would run into what felt like a gatekeeper. Somebody who felt like, well, they embrace that idea of being the person in the know. Oh, I can connect you with the right person. Well, you know what? You need to not have to know who that gatekeeper is to have access to that. So I carry that with me with everything that we do as a government today. And I think that will is increasing with your current elected officials. And I have expertise now with some of the folks that are serving with me in all different ways of communication. And from grassroots to technology to that language access and evidence-based ways of communication. But it's going to be a constant thing. No matter what we do, I mean, we held more meetings on the bike plan than we've held on most topics in recent history, and still it just didn't get to as many people as we needed to be. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, you got it, thanks.
My name is Charlie Morris. I want to thank you for your presentations, both of you. I've already had significant trust in your leadership, and it's helped me raise that even more. Two, I think, related questions. I happen to work as a volunteer with an organization that serves the underserved and have a lot of contact with immigrants. Wondering if there's been any, and let me use the word I want to use, invasion of ICE in Oak Park, and what is the policy officially, both maybe for village leadership and the police dealing with ICE?
I'll start, and then on the small business community, if you've got anything that you want to add, then please feel free. So we are officially a sanctuary city on Tuesday night's agenda. We're just strengthening that a little bit in wanting to hold accountable to the extent that we can with any outside agencies that come into our community to operate in the same way that we expect our own law enforcement to operate. Meaning identify yourself, meaning don't wear masks, meaning, so we can't interfere with ICE if they were to come into our community, but we don't have to do anything to help them. And what we want to do is make sure that we're not fear-mongering, make sure we're not being alarmists, but working to make sure that every sector of our community, whether it be everyday residents or small business community, have the information on knowing their rights and how to handle if someone were to come into their place of work, what they have access to and what you can say no. And that is private, any of those private spaces in your workspace or in your home that you can say you need a warrant, okay? You don't have to let them in. I think we need to do a better job still at making sure we get that information out. It's been, we've got our website's pretty built out, not always the best way to reach people. We've got some grassroots organizations that are going to actually put out lawn signs in how to get access to that information. I'm grateful to have those partnerships with those grassroots organizations that can sometimes do what government can't do. That's how we made it through the migrant crisis, right? Was in partnership with the community. And I'm grateful for all of the community of congregations and grassroots organizations that made our response to our possible. I do have a direct line to the governor's office. And so I called that person just on Friday because Daniel Biss in Evanston had received a call, and I just wanted to be like, okay, exactly, just want to make sure this is working. You're going to let me know if somebody comes, if you're aware of somebody coming into Oak Park. And the answer is yes, okay, but I need it to be substantiated. I'm not going to go out there and put out an alarm if it's not substantiated. And we need to be, so I'm not looking to put a target on Oak Park's back. I'm not out there taking interviews in ways and making statements above and beyond that potentially could put our community actually in danger. So I'm going to be holding firm. I'm maintaining those conversations and access to information, and will stand by our sanctuary city ordinance. And but I'm also, going to be relying on those partnerships for accessing the people who need the information, through nonprofits, through people who know what they're doing and can help me.
Can I ask a follow-up on that?
Sure.
What is your recommendation for those of us who are in the community, not necessarily in a nonprofit or something, but just regular citizens, if we do see ICE activity or see immigrants who have particular needs, what would you like us to be doing to respond to that?
Okay, let me see if I can actually pull it up. Okay, so
Could you repeat the question?
so the question was for our residents of Oak Park who are not engaged with a nonprofit, maybe what would you do if you saw ICE? What should you do? Okay, so it's you're not supposed to engage. Okay, don't engage. Stay safe. If you are able to record, or if you are able to have, if somebody is being detained, if you have the ability to ask their name and date of birth, ask that. Then there are places that you can call. ICER is a website that has a lot of really great information. Some of this is going to be on those lawn signs that are going to be coming out soon, and then information that you can identify at Village Hall. Don't go and post it on Facebook. All you're going to do is potentially strike fear, where that go through the channels of calling the lines with ICER. And another so there's CASO, West Suburban Action Project. That's one place and where you can find out more information. There's a number, 855-435-7693. You can call. Again, there's all of this is available on our village website as well. So we'll put it in paper form. We'll put it on on those lawn signs. We'll try to work with the small business community for anyone who wants training on how to respond. Because I'm not really great at those analogies, but I've been trained in CPR, but if I don't do it regularly, I'm not going to remember, in that moment of crisis. So just do everything we can to train people. But ICER is one website that you can look up that's going to have really great information. Tim?
Yeah, hello, I'm Jim Babcock, Oak Park resident. Thanks, both of you, again for coming out. It's great to hear you coming out to the community. I have a question for Rob, but before that I want to give a shout out to Oak Park Sustainability Officer, Lindsay Naratka. She's fantastic. She's been very proactive. She's been in the job for maybe a little less than a year. She's been very proactive in terms of getting work on the climate action plan that Oak Park has. Been very collaborative, working with organizations like within the community, like the library, Oak Park Climate Action Network. She's been terrific, and I've seen a lot more publicity now about the plan since she's been in office. I forget where, but the various emails and for your information newsletter. It's like on the front pages now instead of buried. So my question for Rob is, how would you rate the business community's performance regarding the climate plan? Specifically, reduction of greenhouse gases. Lindsay recently led a meeting at the library that sort of gave a review of how things were going with the plan. And one of the elements of it is benchmarking. Buildings 10,000 square feet or more are supposed to be reporting their emissions, their water use, to give a baseline. And the information we got was that the participation has been much less than what was hoped for. Are there roadblocks? Are there problems in the business community that you see for businesses to become actively engaged in this plan?
Yeah, I think think there are some roadblocks that make it challenging for businesses to engage at the level they would like to, particularly retail businesses, restaurants, things like that. Part of it is infrastructure, right? If you think about where, take our restaurants, they're all in old buildings, right? Those buildings weren't designed to be terribly sustainable. For example, could we switch to electric instead of gas appliances? We could, but we'd have to retrofit an entire building. It would be just very costly, very, very costly to do that. I do think the local business community has made some efforts. Take Out 25, which you all may be familiar with, has created the green dining district, and everybody who's in that, all the restaurants that are part of that, have agreed to use more compostables and LED lights and things like that. So there are smaller steps we take. I think the reality is there are some infrastructure things that, just in an old community like this, that are harder to deal with than if you're opening up in a brand new building where you can design it that way. I also think there are still some cultural things, right? You think about, again, I can just talk about my own perspective. In the restaurant industry, we use a lot of water. It's a necessary thing to operate a restaurant, to use a lot of water. Are there things we can do to minimize that? Sure. But it's not the way. Just being honest about it, it's not the way the people who've been in this industry for a long time have been trained. So it's taking an effort to move people. I think to answer your question directly, Jim, how would I grade the business community on this? A C, right? I think people are trying. They're doing the things that are easy. I'll speak for myself, right? When people come to me and say, "Hey, can you use more? Would you use compostable products?" Sure. I also have to take into fact that those tend to be more expensive than non-compostable products, but we've done that. But then, not to bring up an issue that's been a little touchy, but when people said, "Well, can you stop using single-use plastics?" Well, I can't, except for all of the people that come in and order takeout say, "Can I have a fork?" I can't give them a metal fork, right? So I got to figure out some solution for that. So I think there's a lot more we can do. I think people are attuned to it, though.
Are you all willing to stay an extra 5 minutes?
Sure.
Okay, so we're going to have maybe one or two more questions, but we are supposed to leave here now, but that's okay. We'll go till just about 10 till, and before we do that, I just want to do a really quick thank you to both of you for coming. So if you have to go, we understand, but if you have other questions, we have time for one or two more. Oh, go ahead. John.
What's the status of Barnes & Noble moving into the old Marshall Field building?
The Barnes & Noble does have a signed lease with the owner of the building. You might have noted that about a month or so ago, there was a request on the board agenda that we then tabled for consideration of a tax incentive to incentivize that signing of that lease. Well, the incentive was not for Barnes & Noble. The incentive was for the building owner and the work to rehab the space so that they could be able to make the changes for Barnes & Noble necessary for that. It's a challenging space. The interior of the building has these columns that are all throughout that first floor that interfere with a open air space area that some businesses would want. And the business owner has not been willing over the last decade plus to divide the space up that would have allowed for it to have been rented sooner. He's always wanted to have that one unicorn business, I'll say, that could, have the banking and the need for the entire first floor plus the basement. And so then to be able to make some of the changes to the building, that becomes something that is of interest to a municipality, because even if Barnes & Noble were to leave, those modifications are made so we don't have to sit there again for this long recruitment process for another unicorn business. So it goes to the building owner and the realization that it is expensive to maintain and upgrade a historical building. in a responsible way. He has chosen actually to not pursue that and to make the upgrades himself. He is planning to, so we won't see that agenda item come back before the village board. Barnes and Noble is coming. They have signed their lease. They, what the owner is looking to do is seek landmark status with the county so that they can potentially see some tax reprieve there, okay? And then that to assist with what the costs are to the, again, the landowner, not Barnes and Noble, for the recruitment of that business to that location. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you
Marcia,
all.
take the mic, please.
You know, as far as ICER, I just want to say, I do know that those grassroots organizations are reaching out to community congregations. So I don't feel like that I necessarily gave enough information or as clear information on that, and that needs to happen this week. So I'll make sure that those connections are made and that there's more information that comes here. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you again for your presentation. It was really informative and helpful. Just a quick note, next week we are going to continue with a focus on our villages. And we have Vanessa Matheny, am I pronouncing that correctly, from Village Hall?
Matheny.
Okay, Matheny, who is in our village government and is helping us, or helping them to coordinate responses to emergencies. So it's not just police coming in and treating it as a criminal or crime issue, but the kinds of services that I think we would all hope if it was in our families. So that's next week, and then the week after that we're going to continue with our final presentation with another focus on our village, and that has to do with the Historical Society Museum, and Frank Lipo is coming back to talk about religion in our community and how it's evolved. So thank you all, and thanks for coming this morning.